They dropped me off at the edge of the woods just before sundown. The ranger, I think his name was Glenn, didn't have much to say. He barely even looked at me, just handed me a folded map, a ring of keys, and a heavy thermos, before pointing down the trail. Follow the markers. Tower 9's about a mile out. There will be no radio for the first hour. Let the battery warm. A long pause. Then, quieter. Stick to the rules. He didn't explain what he meant. Just climbed back into his dusty truck and rattled away down the dirt road, leaving me standing there with my pack digging into my shoulder, and the forest swallowing the last of the light. It just feels different out here. The trees are older, thicker, the kind that press in close and dampen the sound of your own footsteps. And after about 20 minutes of walking, I realized I could hear my own heartbeat better than I could hear the birds. Eventually, the path narrowed, winding uphill through bramble and pine needles, until finally the lookout came into view. A spindly silhouette against a bruised sky. Tower 9. It looked older than the pictures, thinner somehow, like it had been worn down by years of wind and rain. 60 feet of wood and rusted steel, standing alone among the trees. After gazing at it for a little too long, I finally climbed the stairwell, feeling each step shift slightly under my boots. The tower creaked like an old ship, not dangerously, just enough to remind me I was completely alone. The inside was simple. It was a small room, with windows on all sides, a battered metal desk, a two-way radio, a cot bolted to the floor, and shelves stocked with canned goods and an old dented kettle. The whole place smelled faintly of dust, oil, and pine sap. I dropped my gear on the cot and stretched, wincing as my spine popped. I was used to noise, car horns, sirens, neighbors' arguments leaking through cheap drywall. But here, the silence felt dense, like it was waiting for something. Taped above the desk was a single sheet of yellowed paper, its edges curled and brittle. I leaned in to read it, half expecting evacuation routes or equipment lists. Instead, I found this. Chittering Pines, Tower 9, Rules and Protocols. Strict adherence required. 1. Remain inside the tower between 12 a.m. and 5 a.m. Do not respond to external stimuli. 2. If you notice lights moving through the forest at night, do not signal, investigate, or observe them directly. 3. Should you hear knocking on the trapdoor during night hours, do not respond. Stay silent until sunrise. 4. If an unfamiliar voice comes through the radio, lower the volume immediately and recite your name until it stops. 5. If you see figures perched in the treetops, avert your gaze and continue normal duties. 6. Each morning at exactly 7:03 a.m., document the number of birds visible from the east-facing window. If no birds are present, strike a match and let it burn to the base. 7. Keep the door locked at all times. No visitors are scheduled during your rotation. 8. If you awaken to find the windows open, exit the tower immediately without touching anything inside and wait beneath the tower until sunrise. I stared at it for a long time. It didn't look like a prank. There was no smirking tone, no wink in the language, just plain instructions, practical, almost sterile, written by someone who had expected them to be followed. I could almost hear Ranger Glenn's voice in my head. Stick to the rules. Maybe it was just a tradition, some old ranger superstition, passed down to spook the new guys. Maybe. I left the paper where it was. I unpacked my gear, lined up the canned food on the shelf, and filled the kettle to make some coffee. The radio remained silent on the desk. Every once in a while, it crackled faintly, like something shifting just out of range. But no voices came through. Outside, the sky bled from purple to black, and the trees seemed to stretch taller with the darkness. The forest out there looked different at night, less like scenery and more like a wall. I locked the door before bed, not because of the rules, just because it felt right. The first few days passed without incident. Mornings usually started the same. A slow pale dawn, rising behind the eastern ridge, throwing long shadows across the forest floor. I would stand at the east-facing window, squinting for birds. And on most days, there were a few. Scrub jays, robins, the occasional black-capped chickadee flitting between the pines. And each time, I made a note in the logbook, just like the rules said. But if no birds showed up, I would strike a match and let it burn to my fingertips, wincing at the tiny bite of heat. This only happened twice, both on mornings when the mist was so thick I could barely see the trees below. The rest of the day was usually maintenance, scanning the tree line for smoke, recording weather patterns, and occasionally checking the distant trails with binoculars. Routine work, but necessary work. Exactly what I signed up for. The radio stayed mostly silent. Every morning I checked in with the base station, a bored-sounding voice. Sometimes Jared, sometimes an older woman named Marlene. They asked for basic reports: wind speed, visibility, temperature, and I never asked about the rules. Still, small things gnawed at the edge of my attention. Little shifts in the way the trees moved after sundown. Not wind exactly, but a kind of slow, deliberate swaying that seemed to ripple outward from a point I couldn't quite locate. And a few times, just before bed, I thought I saw pinpricks of light deep between the trees. Tiny, flickering, distant. Not enough to be a campfire, more like lanterns, swinging slow and low through the underbrush. And each time I shut off the lantern in the tower, sat quietly and waited until they faded, just like the rules said. I told myself it was other rangers, hunters, or maybe hikers, ignoring the off-season restrictions. I told myself a lot of things. Mostly, I told myself not to break the rules. Not even once. The real loneliness set in around the end of the first week. The kind of loneliness you don't notice at first. It creeps up on you, soft-footed, until one morning you realize you haven't spoken a full sentence aloud in 3 days. I started narrating my actions just to hear something. Boiling water, filling logbook, cleaning the windows. Little affirmations that I was still there, still real. And at night, when the wind shifted just right, I thought I could hear things beneath the usual forest noises. Low murmurs, like someone whispering across a long dark hallway. Never clear, never close. Just enough to make the silence around them feel unnatural. And still, no real incidents. No banging on the hatch. No strangers at the door. Just me, the tower, and the long waiting dark. By the second week, the rhythm of the forest had begun to sink into me. Wake before the sun, look the birds, scan the horizon for smoke. Keep the radio close but turned low. Walk the perimeter of the clearing when the weather allowed. Days bled into each other, soft and featureless, like waves sliding over stone. And yet, the longer I stayed, the harder it became to shake the feeling that something unseen was winding tighter around me. Like the woods themselves were growing heavier, more attentive. It started small, with harmless things, things you could explain away. One morning, I woke to find a bird nailed to the outside of the eastern window frame. A small thing, a robin maybe, its wings pinned open crudely with splinters of wood, its head lolling at a sharp angle. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, just placed there, carefully. I stared at it for a long time, my mouth dry. Then, without thinking, I stepped outside, climbed onto the narrow wraparound deck, and pulled it down. It came away from the frame almost too easily, like it had been waiting for me. I buried the robin in the loose soil beneath the tower. Didn't log it, didn't radio it in. It didn't seem worth it. At least, not then. When I went back inside the tower, the kettle was whistling softly on the stove. I hadn't turned it on. The lights in the woods became more frequent after that. Always after nightfall, always distant. Little flickers, weaving between the trees in slow, purposeful arcs. At first, I did what the rules said. Turned off my lamp, stayed still, avoided looking directly at them. But one night, when the moon was full and the air was cold enough to frost the inside of the windows, I slipped, just for a second. I was refilling the lanterns, glancing out the west window, when I caught a glimpse of something moving between the trees. Not a light this time, a figure. It was pale, tall, standing too still to be natural. It was only a glimpse, a heartbeat worth of time, but it burned itself into my mind all the same. The way it leaned just slightly forward, like it was listening. I squeezed my eyes shut, dropped the lantern, and didn't open them again until I heard it. Whatever it was, moving away into the woods. A sound like branches brushing against glass, retreating into the deeper dark. The next morning, I logged 4 birds, even though I only saw 3. I struck a match anyway. Around the 3rd week, the nights changed. They became thicker somehow, not just darker but denser, almost liquid in their silence. Sounds dulled. The tower itself seemed to shrink, pull tighter into its own creaking frame. And with it came the knocking. It was just after midnight when I first heard it. A soft, deliberate tap, tap, tap on the trapdoor at the base of the stairs. I froze, heart hammering in my throat. And for a moment, I genuinely thought I was imagining it. Some stress dream sparked by too many days alone. But it came again. 3 knocks, evenly spaced, exactly like a person might do if they were standing just below me, looking up through the thin boards. I remembered the rules. Stay silent. Do not respond. So I sat there in the cot, clutching the cold frame of the bed, counting my breaths, staring at the silver of moonlight leaking through the window. The knocking came twice more that night. Each time it was softer, closer, not louder, closer, as if whatever was knocking wasn't at the hatch anymore, but at the base of the tower itself, or maybe even inside the walls. By morning, there were deep gorges clawed into the wood around the trapdoor. 3 long parallel scratches. I didn't radio it in. I didn't mention it in the logbook. I didn't even let myself think about it. At least not fully. I swept the floor, boiled water, and logged the weather. Normal duties. Normal duties. Normal duties. On another morning, the windows were open when I woke up. All of them, swinging gently in the early mist. I sat up too fast, hitting my head on the bunk above me, the world tilting sideways with sudden panic. The rules came flooding back. If you awaken to find the windows open, exit the tower immediately, without touching anything in sight, and wait beneath the tower until sunrise. I moved on instinct, grabbed my boots, stumbled down the stairs 2 at a time, not even stopping to glance back. I sat beneath the tower, huddled against one of the support beams, watching the woods pulse in and out of the thinning fog. Nothing moved. No figures. No lights. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That something was standing at the top of the stairs, just out of sight, peering down at me through the loose boards. And when the sun finally cleared the ridge, I climbed back up slowly, cautious, hands shaking. Inside, everything looked untouched, neat, still. Except the kettle was whistling again, a low, insistent wail, and beside it, on the table, someone had left a single match, unburned. After that, I stopped thinking of the rules as superstition. They were not suggestions. They were not jokes. They were survival. The tower had its own way of being, and if I wanted to last a full rotation, I had to obey. Even when the forest pressed closer at night. Even when the knocking grew louder, longer, more frantic. Even when the figures began to gather in the trees, unmoving, their heads cocked sideways as if listening to my every breath. Especially then. By the end of the 4th week, sleep came in short, shallow bursts. I ate only what I had to. I spoke aloud less and less. I started hearing the radio murmuring at odd hours. Tiny bursts of garbled static. Half words buried under crackling. A few times, I thought I heard my own name whispered through the receiver. And each time, I turned the volume down low, pressing my face into the mattress, and whispering my full name over and over until the sound stopped. Just like the rules said. Still, the tower felt smaller every day, less like shelter and more like a trap. Something was wearing me down, waiting for me to slip, and I was getting tired, so very tired. The last night was the worst. I knew it would be, from the moment the sun dipped behind the ridgeline and didn't take the warmth with it. The forest stayed heavy, oppressive, colder than it should have been, as if the light had been sucked into the soil instead of fading naturally. The trees didn't move that night. There was no wind, no calls from the birds, no distant crackle of branches settling. Only the sound of my own breathing and the low groan of the tower's frame, shivering under a weight I couldn't see. I checked the locks twice, 3 times, sat in the center of the room with my back to the wall. The radio turned low beside me. My flashlight clutched so tightly in my hand that my knuckles ached. And at exactly midnight, the trapdoor rattled violently. Not a knock this time, not soft testing taps. It shook, hard, as if someone were trying to tear it open with both hands. I squeezed my eyes shut and kept still, every muscle screaming to run, to hide, to do something. But the rules were clear. Stay silent. The rattling stopped after a minute, or maybe an hour. Time blurred into static, and in the awful hush that followed, I heard something much worse. A voice. Low, rasping, just at the edge of hearing. It didn't call my name. It didn't shout. It simply coaxed. A slow, patient whisper, dripping up through the cracks in the floorboard, speaking in a language that felt wrong in my ears. A language too old for a place like this. My body locked up completely. I pressed my forehead against the cold floor and mouthed my name over and over again like a prayer. Thomas Isaac Reed. Thomas Isaac Reed. Thomas Isaac Reed. The voice went on for what felt like forever. Never louder, never closer, just present. And when the first grey light of dawn finally seeped through the mist, the voice evaporated like morning frost. But I didn't rise. Not right away. Because I could feel it. Something had changed. Something was inside now. The radio crackled sharply, loud enough to make me flinch, and this time a clear voice broke through. Tower 9, respond. Tower 9, this is Station Bravo. Come in. It was Jared's voice. Normal, familiar, and for a heartbeat, I almost cried with relief. I lunged for the microphone, hand shaking, but just before I keyed it, something in the back of my mind tugged. The rules. If an unfamiliar voice comes through the radio. But this was Jared. I knew him. I had spoken to him a dozen times. Still, something about the way he spoke my tower's name, Tower 9, was off. Too careful, like he was reading it phonetically, not saying it naturally. I set the radio down, turned the volume low, pressed my back to the wall and began whispering my name again. The radio hissed and popped in anger, and for a few seconds, the voice, Jared's voice, melted into something else, something wet and cracking and wrong. It screamed once, then fell silent. The day dragged on. I didn't move from my spot by the wall, didn't eat, didn't drink. I just watched the trees, waiting. And that's when I saw them. Dozens of figures, perched high in the pine branches like grotesque roosting birds. Their limbs hung limp and loose, their heads tilted at impossible angles. They swayed gently, as if breathing with the forest. They didn't move otherwise, didn't climb down, didn't wave. They only watched. By sundown, the real knock came. A single deliberate knock on the trapdoor. Then another and another. Not frantic this time, not angry, patient, inviting. I didn't answer. I didn't breathe. The knock came again, softer, more insistent, like a mother tapping at a sleeping child's door. Slowly, without willing it, I found myself standing, walking to the trapdoor, hand reaching for the bolt. It wasn't fear anymore. It was inevitability. The tower, the forest, the ruins, all of it had led me to this final moment. But at the last second, a sharp crack echoed across the clearing. A flare fired into the sky, bright and red and burning against the heavy dusk. I stumbled back from the trapdoor, blinking. There were voices, real ones, human ones, shouting through the trees. Radios squawking, boots pounding up the trail. It was the rescue team. I saw them break through the tree line, 6 figures in ranger uniforms, real and solid and blessedly alive. I fumbled with the door, threw it open, and practically fell down the stairs into their arms. They caught me, half carrying, half dragging me away from the tower, without asking any questions. I didn't look back. Not even once. Not even when I heard the trapdoor creak open behind me. Not even when I heard something large and slow and wet climbing up into the now empty tower. Not even when the trees began to whisper again, louder than ever. Later, after they checked me out at the ranger station, after they had given me water, wrapped me in a blanket, and stuck a clipboard in my lap, one of the older rangers leaned in close and said, almost apologetically, "You did good, son. Most don't make it a full rotation." I stared at him, hollow and shaking, as he gently pulled the clipboard from my hands and set it aside. Behind him, through the window, I could see the forest, waiting, still. I knew, with a certainty so deep it was almost peaceful, that the thing I left behind wasn't trapped in Tower 9. It never had been. The ruins were never about keeping it out. They were about keeping me in. And I had almost let it loose.